Hey everyone, Gamecube with Fries here, with another collection video. And this time I'm going to be taking a look at my Nintendo GameCube collection. The GameCube is actually my single favorite console of all time. It has a lot of really great, interesting exclusives. Some of my favorite Nintendo games of all time have come off of this system, not to mention some of my favorite games, period. Early last year, I did a couple of videos talking about my GameCube collection, and my collection hasn't really changed at all since. It's kind of an expensive console to collect for, so I haven't really touched on it that much. But I don't feel like I really did a good job summarizing my thoughts on each game in that video. So, and on top of that, since I'm sort of just going through my whole collection, I figured this would be a great opportunity to sort of redo those videos, because really they're not that good. So, starting off, The Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition, which contains both of the NES Zeldas, Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, as well as both of the Nintendo 64 games, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. And this is a pretty nice collection. I don't really like the Nintendo 64 games as much as I did when I was younger, to be quite honest. Zelda 1 I definitely appreciate a lot more. So, I don't know. It's a pretty nice collection. I don't know. Ocarina of Time, I'm not into that much anymore. There's a lot of stuff that kind of bugs me about it, especially after playing something like Link Between Worlds. And Majora's Mask has much better world design than Ocarina of Time, but at the same time, I kind of have some issues with the 3-day time limit and having to go back and redo stuff. It kind of gets in the way of sort of just exploring the world and figuring things out. I do think it's better than Ocarina of Time, but at the same time it has a number of its own shortcomings. And we have Legend of Zelda the Windwaker, which is one of my favorite Zeldas, if not my absolute favorite Zelda. I really like the sort of open world feeling of this one. You know, you sort of sail around and discover these different islands. There's just a lot of exploration involved. I feel like the main dungeons aren't really that strong. The first few are alright, but they get kind of underwhelming. The game itself is pretty easy too. There's not a whole lot of challenge here. The last dungeon, from what I've played of it, for some reason, I haven't finished this game. The last dungeon does get a bit challenging from what I can recall, but most of the fun I had with this game was just with exploring and sort of finding my own path. I really like the sort of open-ended feel of this game. Definitely worth picking up. And here we have Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, which is another game that I was really into when I was younger when it first came out, but I don't really like that much now. It just feels like kind of a retread of Ocarina of Time. It feels like they tried to make it bigger without really doing anything to sort of flesh out the larger scope. You just have this great big empty overworld with a bunch of stuff dotted around. There's a lot of weird fetch quest shit you have to do in between each dungeon. Like, this is the prime example of stupid drawn-out tutorial bullshit in video games, because the entire first 2 hours of this game is you just running around town doing tutorial shit. It's 2 hours before you even get to the first dungeon. It's just a very bizarre, really not that great Zelda game. Not terrible, just, I don't know, I don't like it as much as some of the other ones. Here we have Luigi's Mansion, which is one of my favorite games on the system. I've played it a bit much. This is actually a game I've played so much that I really can't play it that much anymore. But I really like it's kind of a unique gameplay mechanic. You go around, you explore the mansion, you capture these ghosts. It's simple, but it's fun. There's a lot of replay value because you can get different rankings depending on how much treasure you collect, and it's really fun sort of seeking out all the treasure and trying to find where it is. I really like that. Very, very good. But very short game, too. You can easily beat it in like a couple of hours. We have Mega Man Anniversary Collection, which has the Mega Man 1 through 8. And I really like these games. I mentioned in my PS2 collection video that I've never really been any good at the Mega Man X games, but these ones, the classic series, I've always really been able to get into. I like these games a lot. They're simplistic, but they're fun. The level design is challenging. I've always really liked the sort of like collecting the boss abilities and using them on different bosses to exploit their weaknesses, and then trying to find out the weaknesses of the late game bosses after you beat all the main bosses. There's a lot of fun to be had with these games. I feel like they don't quite reach the sort of insanity in terms of difficulty that the X series reaches sometimes, and especially the Zero series. I like Mega Man Classic a lot. We have Metroid Prime, and this is a pretty good game. It's essentially Super Metroid translated into 3D. It very much feels like that same kind of game where the world is very non-linear, very organic, and you do a lot of running around trying to find stuff. I don't really... It's not my favorite Metroid, but I do like it a lot. The controls take a little bit of getting used to, but they're not bad at all. They're really good, actually. If anything, I don't like how directionless this game feels sometimes. Like, there's making a sort of open, non-linear world, and then there's just dropping the player in and just sort of saying, well, go find it. This is one of the few games I've had to use a strategy guide for. Call me fucking stupid, but I don't know. Like, this game gets really directionless sometimes. Mostly when you have to like go find the 12 artifacts you need to open the last area. That gets really ridiculous. But I still enjoyed it. There's exploration, and then there's just sending you on a fucking Easter egg hunt. And here we have Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, which I actually like a lot more than Prime 1, because it feels a bit more focused. It manages to keep that sort of open-ended Metroid feel without completely like sacrificing it. Like, the environments are a bit more focused. It feels like Zero Mission, where you'll go into an area, the area branches off in multiple directions. There are parts you can't get to without certain power-ups, but, you know, you'll go into an area, and you'll spend a while sort of exploring and trying to figure the area out, and then after that, you move on to the next area. And there is sort of some backtracking back and forth as you get abilities, but it doesn't quite get as ridiculous as Prime 1 does, where you'll get something, and then in order to get to the next thing, you'll have to backtrack across half the whole world map. I really liked how much more focused this one feels. A lot of people really don't like the dark world aspect to it, how it sort of drains your health as you go, but I never had a problem with it. It doesn't drain much at once, and you very quickly get a suit that slows it down, and then towards the end of the game you'll get a suit that completely negates any damage at all. I thought this had some really genuinely great boss fights. I don't know. A lot of people prefer Prime 1, but I actually think this is the better of the two, so I don't know. Just feels a bit more focused. It's not to say Prime 1 is a bad game, just that that's my preference. Namco Museum, which is a compilation of a bunch of classic Namco arcade games, and I've had some fun with this one. It's been a little while since I've sort of sat down and put it in, but I really like this game. It's fun to occasionally just kick back and play some old classic arcade games. You know, this has like stuff like Pac-Man and Galaga and Dig Dug. Not the most complex or challenging games, but still fun to put in every once in a while. And here we have Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, which is my favorite game on the Gamecube and probably one of my favorite RPGs of all time. I really love the combat system where you're rewarded for actually having some input besides just choosing menu commands. The writing is actually really good. It puts you into some really crazy situations. There's just a lot of creativity to this game. That really is the embodiment of why I love the sort of GameCube, Game Boy Advance era, because Nintendo was really sort of experimenting and branching out with their ideas, and this really shows that. This is a really crazy, fun game. It's a pretty good length too. I think it took me like 36 hours to get through, and there's like a post-game super dungeon that you can attempt. You do have to do a bit of level grinding to stand a chance, but this is one of the best RPGs I've ever played, honestly. A lot of fun. Definitely recommend it. The whole Paper Mario series is really good. We have Pikmin with this cover I tried to print out, but it kind of messed up. This is a really, really good game. There is some stuff I don't like about it. For example, the day limit can get kind of strict. It doesn't leave a whole lot of room for error. But then again, I did beat it with, I think, about 8 or 9 days to spare. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm just overstressing about it. But this is probably one of my favorite Nintendo series. Really creative. I like how it kind of mixes together elements of an adventure game with sort of real-time strategy. You have to manage these 3 different kinds of Pikmin. You use them for different situations. There's puzzle solving to it. It's a very creative game. I like this a lot. It has gotten a bit expensive, though. I'm actually surprised. When I got it, it was about $5. Now I see them going for like $30, $35. And speaking of expensive, Pikmin II with another kind of messed up cover that I tried to print. I like this one a lot. I don't know. I can't decide whether my favorite Pikmin game is this or 3. I think 3 is honestly the best, but this still does a lot of really interesting things that they really didn't touch on in 1 or 3. They tried to make it much more of an adventure game, which is pretty cool. There's no day limit, which makes it a lot more relaxing to play. It actually gives you time to sort of build up your Pikmin if you want to, and in some situations you actually have to. This actually puts you into some pretty crazy combat situations. There are some really tough bosses. And it also adds in some light dungeon crawling elements. Each overworld has multiple dungeons you can find where there's hidden treasure inside, and usually like a boss or sometimes even multiple bosses as you get later in the game. It's just a really, really fleshed out game. It's pretty long too. One file I put like around 24 hours into it and I didn't even finish it. This is definitely a very, very good game, but it's gotten crazy expensive. I don't know how much the Wii version is, but the GameCube version goes for like $50 or $60 these days. It's pretty crazy. And here we have Resident Evil 0. And this is an alright Resident Evil. It's not my favorite, but I don't like dislike it or anything. I just feel like the partner mechanic is really creative. It kind of inventory management is kind of a nightmare in this game, to be completely honest. Because instead of having the item chest like in the other Resident Evils that you just sort of stash all your stuff in and you can access it by going to a save room whenever you need something, you have only so many slots between these two characters, and some of the items take up multiple slots, like some of the bigger weapons. And if you want to store something, you basically have to drop it on the ground. So if there's a specific item you need and you left it somewhere, in some cases you might have to backtrack across an entire area to get it. If you forgot, a crank or something, or some ammo or a weapon or the hookshot or whatever. It just gets a little crazy sometimes. It's still a really good game. It just gets a bit drawn out with having to manage so many items across an entire map with no single way of storing them. And here we have the remake of the original Resident Evil. And this is my favorite game in the entire series. Very well done. Just the overall atmosphere. It feels like how a Resident Evil game should feel. It's genuinely creepy. It has some really good enemies. I like the whole twist on how zombies in this one, unless you burned their bodies, they would get back up later and they'd be twice as strong. This really does genuinely feel like a survival horror. The puzzles are pretty well designed. And the graphics actually hold up really well compared to a lot of other games from the time. This came out in 2002 and it still looks great. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the remastered version looks coming out next year. We have Resident Evil 2, which this isn't remastered or remade or anything like Resident Evil 1 on the GameCube. It's pretty much a straight port of, I believe, the Dreamcast version of Resident Evil 2. I'm not sure. But this is pretty good. As far as the classic games go, I think there are better Resident Evil games than this. I honestly think it's a little bit bland, a little bit short. The whole dual storyline thing is really cool, where you'll finish the game as one character and then you'll play the other character's perspective, you know, taking you through different paths and even having you fight different bosses in some cases. It's kind of a cool approach, but at the same time, it really doesn't grab me as much as some of the other games do. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. This is actually one of my favorite Resident Evil games, but I've barely ever played it. It's weird. I haven't really played it much since I first finished it years ago, and I've always been meaning to go back and give it another playthrough, but I keep forgetting. I keep getting sidetracked. I don't know, it feels a bit more focused than 2 did, like there was a bit more thought behind it. It has some really genuinely tense moments, such as constantly being chased down by Nemesis, the fights against the worm monster in particular stand out to me as some of the more memorable moments in the game. It's really cool how you can sort of mix different kinds of gunpowder to make your own ammo. It adds actually a lot of customization to how you play. It's really cool. And here we have Resident Evil 4, the game that pretty much divided the entire fan base, because it took things in a bit of a different direction, turned it more of a third-person shooter. And it is more of an action game than any of the other Resident Evils, but it still retains some horror elements, and it is well designed. It's directed by the creator of the series. Like, out of all of the sort of third-person, more action-oriented Resident Evils, this one is probably the best. There's a lot of variety in the environments and enemy design. It's just a very well-made game. And next to the remake, it's probably my favorite in the series. I like this one a lot. Sonic Mega Collection. And this collects basically all of the Sonic games that ever came out on Genesis. I have original Genesis copies of most of them now, but when I got this, I believe I only had 1 and 2, and I think Mean Bean Machine on the Genesis. I got this a really long time ago. So it was really cool to have all of the old Sonic games in one place, and it actually plays really comfortably on the GameCube controller. Considering how like the old Sonic games don't translate well to a lot of newer controllers, actually it fits pretty well on the GameCube controller. And on top of that, there's a few unlockable games here too. Like you can unlock the combined version of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You can unlock Ristar, or Rystar, however you pronounce it, which I believe is from the same creator of the Sonic series, if I'm not mistaken. There's some really interesting stuff in there. It's a nice collection. Sonic Gems Collection. This is kind of a weird one because 2 of the main 3 games that it sort of like labels itself as having aren't really that great. Sonic the Fighters is a borderline broken arcade fighter. And Sonic R is a very weird, floaty kind of racing game, I guess. Sonic CD is really good. It feels similar to Sonic 1, but it sort of trims back a lot of the drawn-out level design and generally weird feel that game had. And this also has a bunch of the Game Gear games on here, plus both of the Vector Man games for Genesis. So there is good stuff here. It's just a bit more of a mixed bag than Mega Collection. Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut. And I was super into like the 3D Sonic games when I was a kid. Don't really like them as much now. This one's not terrible. It is a bit buggy, but I think this does stand as probably the best 3D Sonic. In my opinion, it's really the only one that still holds up. And even then, it does have its issues. It is a little bit on the buggy side. There are some issues with the camera, but you know, it's not terrible. At least not in my opinion. The Sonic series has definitely gone on to see worse games than that. That's to be sure. And this is a really weird one. Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. This is a bit of a strange one because it's a Sonic game where there really aren't very many points where you play as Sonic. It puts a lot of emphasis on the sort of mech stages, like during Tails and Robotnik scenarios, and then like the treasure hunting stages with Knuckles and Rouge. There really aren't that many actual like platforming stages where you play as Sonic and Shadow. There's it feels like they were trying too hard to force too much variety down your throat, and what we got was kind of a jumbled mess, to be honest. This really isn't that great of a game. There's some kind of neat stuff in there, but overall, it just, I don't think it holds up. Here we have Star Fox Adventures, which I think is an extremely underrated game. A lot of people like to bash on this because it isn't Star Fox 64 2. But, I mean, it is a bit weird that Nintendo decided to sort of just take a game Rare was already working on and then just slap Star Fox on it. But the game itself is good. That's the thing. It plays a lot like Zelda, but it's sort of broken up into... The world is broken up into these different chunks that you explore, which kind of removes a lot of the sort of big, empty overworld problem that games like Ocarina of Time have. So you can just sort of get right into these individual locations and explore. And this is actually a really enjoyable adventure game. It gets difficult. There are a lot of sort of these different challenges where you'll have to, you know, mash a button fast enough or keep a meter within a certain point. But overall, I really enjoyed this game. I've been meaning to give it another playthrough. It's a lot of fun. I don't get why people hate it so much. And wrapping up here, we have Star Fox Assault, which, this isn't the best Star Fox, but it's still pretty good. It kind of goes back to the more sort of arcade shooter style of gameplay, after the more, you know, adventure-based approach of adventures. But I don't know, I like this a lot. It is kind of weird. The on-foot controls are kind of wacky, but I like how it kind of mixes all these different kinds of gameplay together into one. The main mission is kind of short. Excuse me, my nose is getting kind of plugged up. But it actually has a surprising amount of depth to the multiplayer. I haven't played it in a long time. I used to play this all the time with like my family and friends. But I don't know, I like this a lot. It's not quite as replayable as something like Star Fox 64, but there's a lot of variety here, and it's really enjoyable. Like I said, not the best Star Fox, but still really good. So that was my GameCube collection. There are still a couple more GameCube games that I want to check out, but you know, the problem is they've gotten so expensive, and there are so many other new games coming out, it's hard for me to really find room for them, but one of these days. It's not something I actively collect for, because I have most of the games I want for it, but there are still a few I'd like to pick up. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time.